everybody, and welcome back to another Miss Pollard Math YouTube video. Today we're going to be going over one of our algebra topics, which is factoring using perfect square trinomials. So a lot of teachers might make you use perfect square trinomials if you're able to. Some kids will just factor normally, but me specifically, if it is a perfect square trinomial, you must use that rule or I'm taking points off because it's a quicker way to do it. So I always say check first if it's a perfect square trinomial. If it's not, then factor normally. So our perfect square trinomials, first you need to know what that is. You're like, what is a perfect square trinomial? A perfect square trinomial is a squared plus 2ab plus b squared, where a and b are your terms in your polynomial. So that's going to be the first term, that's going to be the last term, and then we have a squared minus 2ab plus b squared, where it's a minus b squared. So we are going to take our squared term, which is our first term, we're going to square root it, square root this term, and that would give me the inside here. So if I was to factor this, that's how I'm going to do it, which we're going to see in a second. And vice versa, if we do the opposite way, this is the same thing as a plus b times a plus b, which when I FOIL that, that becomes this. I personally make my students memorize this rule, where you're going to take the first, square it, take the first times the second times 2, then take the second, square it, and that's how we would FOIL it. Without having to FOIL it, that's a quick shortcut on how to do this. So some teachers are very strict with this, like I am, but it's very important just to do a shortcut. We don't have to sit here and take so long to be able to solve a problem. You could just do it and be done. So let's look at the rules. So the rules is to square the first and third term. In our ax squared plus bx plus c, that's our a and c. I know this is going to be confusing because we're saying a and b, but b is our middle term, but we're using a and c. Just think about it that we're doing the first and our third term. When it's ordered in the correct ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, then we're going to multiply those new terms after we square rooted them. We're going to multiply them together and multiply by 2 to see if we get that middle term, or our bx in our ax squared plus bx plus c rule. And then if it does equal that, then we're going to use our perfect square trinomial rules, where we have the first term square rooted plus the second term square rooted, or minus in between, parentheses squared. If it is not, then we just factor normally. So always check to see if it's a perfect square trinomial first, and then if it's not, factor normally. If it is, use the rule, use the shortcut. So let's look. We have 9x squared plus 24x plus 16. Our first step is to square root the first term. So when I square root my first term, I get 3x. I'm going to square root my last term, and I get 4. I multiply those together, and I get 12x. The next step is to multiply it by 2, because in the middle was the 2 times the first term times the last term. It's not just one time, you have to do it times 2. So we multiply it by 2, and I get 24x, which is what I wanted. That is what I wanted, so it is a perfect square trinomial, and I can apply the rule. The rule says to take the first term square rooted, which is going to be my a value, and take the last term square rooted, which is going to be 4, and because it's a positive, we're going to do plus, and we're going to square. And that's going to be it factored. A lot of the times we have to do the 9 times the 16, what multiplies to whatever that is, and adds to the 24, throw it in the middle, factor by grouping. But here, because it's a perfect square trinomial, I just square root, put it in the middle with the plus, and square it. So do we see how this is a faster way to complete these problems if it is a perfect square trinomial? Let's take a look at one more problem to make sure we're fully seeing how we would complete these problems. So now we have 225x squared minus 240x plus 64. And I am going to square root it, the first and the last. When I square root the first, I get 15x. When I square root the last, I get 8. And I multiply them together. When I multiply them together, I get 15 times 8, which is 120. So I get 120x. But once again, we need to multiply it by 2 to see if it works. So I multiply it by 2 and I get 240. It's a negative 240, which is fine. That just means it's a minus 2ab in the middle. So that works. We have a 240x. That's what I want. So now I'm going to use my perfect square trinomial, where I square rooted the first and got 15x. I square rooted the last and got 8. Because it's a minus, I put a minus in between. And I square it. And that's my factored equation. I personally know that this is a quicker way to complete this rather than having to do our traditional factoring rules that we want it in this proper form. If I put 15x minus 8 times 15x minus 8, that is not proper. I want it to look like 15x minus 8 squared. If I were to graph this, this would show me that it has one x-intercept. It touches the x-axis once. It's very important that we write it this way and that we complete these in the quicker time so we spend more time on other problems. So I hope this was helpful to determine when we can use a perfect square trinomial and when we would have to factor normally.